Hello everyone, welcome to the Buzz the Prey Manga. Today we continue the latest Global Freeze chapter, rewritten and edited by me in English for a smooth reading experience. All visuals and story flow are personally edited to give you the best manga style storytelling. Support the original creator by checking the official manga. So let's dive right into the today's chapter.
Chapter 2888. The principle behind the Golden Feather Clan's void bathrobe is mutual annihilation with the energy of the enemy. As long as the energy level of the attack is high enough, it can penetrate his defenses. Therefore, he must concentrate on guarding against Edward's attack, which could be aimed at him at any moment and cannot do anything else. If a new enemy appears at this time, it would be terrible. However, there was some good news as well. Rules are a double-edged sword. The greater the constraints one imposes on oneself, the stronger one's authority. Edward's causality was triggered solely by eye contact, so the resulting impact was quite limited. We cannot simply ignore everything and kill Zhang Yi like Hoodoo's hellish guillotine. Edward's decision was actually a wise one, striking a good balance between the activation conditions and the threat. If they encounter other opponents, they can easily kill them with their powerful alien energy at the Black Knight level. Zhang Yi asked the others to keep their distance from him, while he found a metal step and slowly sat down, calmly beginning to think about how to deal with everything that was about to happen. Shun Feng and Luo Qiao stood guard beside him, watching out for any more wild puppets or other genus creatures that might come to attack. Lord Lao, our only option now is to hunt down that vampire expert. But he's incredibly good at escaping. If we were to hunt him down, we'd have absolutely no chance of success. Unless the boss comes personally. Fatty Su looked at Zhang Yi and offered a suggestion. Boss, let's abandon our plans to venture deeper into the experimental planet and instead go after that guy. King Arthur and the others stood to the side, their brows furrowed, but they did not rush to offer their opinions. However, it was clear that they did not agree with Fatty Su's proposal. Zhang Yi looked up, frowning, and said, "Nobody knows how far his spell range is. If I were him, I would definitely choose the extreme distance to attack. I wouldn't give the opponent a chance to kill me." As Zhang Yi spoke, he looked at Yang Xinxin and asked, "Xinxin, could you use your causal weapon to suppress him? My meme arrows need to hit a target to control him, but his real body isn't around here right now. Who should I use them on?" Yang Xinxin shook her head helplessly. Zhang Yi does have the ability to make Edward's causality ineffective against him, but that would only require him to become a pure nothingness and enter the world of the void. But in that case, he wouldn't be able to do anything. Zhang Yi frowned and closed his eyes in thought. Meanwhile, more and more special energy bombs continued to be launched. At first, Zhang Yi didn't feel much of a sense of superiority, because his absolute advantage wouldn't be easily overcome. However, when the sixth energy projectile struck his Taishu bathrobe, he suddenly felt that the spatial fluctuations on the surface of the Taishu bathrobe seemed to become traceable. Has his attack frequency increased? Or has he increased the power of his attacks? Zhang Yi frowned. Bang! The attack occurred silently. At this moment, the attack struck his Taishu bathrobe once again. At this moment, the Taishu bathrobe shook even more violently, and the inner layer, which was as radiant as starlight, even began to crumble, resulting in a large amount of peeling. Zhang Yi finally felt. The attacks I am enduring are getting stronger with each attack. It seems even his bullets have acquired a completely new causal law. Only then did Zhang Yi realize what was happening. Edward was in a completely safe area, silently loading the next batch of tidal rounds into his gun. That's what he can stack. When the tide rises, only a faint white line can be seen from afar. However, the massive tides constantly surge and roll up, eventually forming terrifying waves. To ensure that cause and effect are planted 100%, some damage was sacrificed. And then there's something entirely new that's derived from it. Tides. Causal attacks can accumulate and become increasingly powerful. Ultimately, when the causal laws accumulate to a certain extent, they will form a fierce and terrifying wave that will engulf the enemy in one fell swoop. In other words, Zhang Yi originally planned to stall for time and slowly come up with a solution. This approach is clearly not going to work. Edward's attacks continued to intensify, and with each strike that hit Zhang Yi's Taishu bathrobe, the robe shook even more violently than before. Clearly, Zhang Yi doesn't have much time left. Yang Xinxin frowned and reminded Zhang Yi, "Brother Zhang Yi, if it doesn't work, you should hide yourself in the void first, and then we'll find a way to chase him down. His attack range must have a limit." At this moment, Lacha rested his chin on his hand and said, "It is extremely difficult to hunt down a Black Knight-level ability user while being on guard against them. Even if Shunfeng and I joined forces, I'm afraid it would be difficult to accomplish, since neither of us are particularly skilled at pursuit and killing." Yang Xinxin turned her gaze to one side. From beginning to end, the Golden Feather Clan's timeline stood there with an innocent and harmless expression. He didn't actively participate in their conversation, as if it were none of his business. Yang Xinxin turned to look at Shirkong. "Mr. Shirkong, our goals are the same, right?" Time and Space smiled and nodded. "That's right, dear lady." Yang Xinxin said calmly, "Then, please use your abilities to help us hunt down Edward." Shirkong hesitated slightly, then shrugged. "This matter has nothing to do with our Golden Feather Clan, and I have no intention of getting involved in his karma." Yang Xinxin said, "We don't need you to do anything. We just need you to provide us with his coordinates. This shouldn't be difficult for you at all, and he won't even notice if you do it, right?" Time and Space bowed its head, seemingly pondering the pros and cons of its involvement in this matter. Zhang Yi pressed his hands to his knees and shook his head at Yang Xinxin and the others. "Forget it. You don't need to get involved in this. Even if you can confirm his location, are you really capable of killing him?" Zhang Yi knew very well that although Luo Qiao and Shunfeng were allies and would assist him in battle, they would not truly risk their lives for him. Moreover, given Edward's powerful survival abilities as a vampire, even if the two of them joined forces, it would be very difficult to kill him. "But brother, this is the best choice we can make right now." Yang Xinxin told the truth. Zhang Yi shook his head, stood up, and glanced at everyone present. Everyone looked at him with worry in their eyes. Zhang Yi suddenly smiled faintly. "There's no need to worry too much about me. If I couldn't even handle such a small trouble, I wouldn't be your leader." After saying this, he turned his gaze to Shirkong. "What have you thought about it, Lord Shirkong?" Chapter 2889. If Vampire Edward wants to kill Edward, then the ability to locate in time and space is absolutely necessary. Zhang Yi frankly said, "If you still want to work with us, then you must help me solve the current problem. I need you to do anything difficult, just help me locate him." Zhang Yi added the word, "Your Excellency," to his address to Shirkong. When you ask someone for a favor, you should naturally have the right attitude. Shirkong lowered his head and pondered for a moment, a strange light flashing in his eyes. Finally, he looked up, nodded to Zhang Yi, and said, "Okay, I can help you pinpoint his location. I'm just curious, in your current state, what can you still do? When you are inside an experimental planet, your ability to travel through space will be greatly limited, and you will be unable to overcome those barriers. Moreover, even if Edward's location is determined during a 5-kilometer traverse, it would be difficult to catch up with him in the shortest possible time. Even if you catch up to him and fight him one-on-one, can you really kill Edward?" Time and Space were filled with curiosity and inquiry. He suddenly wanted to see what this legendary 6th-generation #1 powerhouse would do next. No one could understand what Zhang Yi was planning to do, not even his own partners. Luo Qiao and Shunfeng also stared at Zhang Yi with a look of surprise and doubt. Zhang Yi did nothing. He simply sat back down on the metal steps, lowered his head, placed his hands on his lap, and slowly crossed them. "Lord Time and Space, please begin." Time Point nodded, then closed his eyes and activated his own ability. Soon, the entire surrounding space took shape in his mind, and the area expanded outwards. Finally, in a building area 360 kilometers away, he found the figure of the man slowly loading bullets. Just as Zhang Yi said, the simpler the triggering conditions of a causal law, the less powerful it is. Edward could not pursue Zhang Yi across mountains and rivers like Huda could, so he had to attack Zhang Yi within a limited area. Time and space opened their eyes and provided Zhang Yi with his location. "Thank you," Zhang Yi said softly. Everyone stared intently at Zhang Yi, eager to see what he planned to do. But they saw nothing. Because the moment Zhang Yi obtained Edward's coordinates, the entire world around him froze. Zhang Yi slowly opened his eyes. In his left eye, the pupil had been replaced by an ancient pendulum. The second and third hands spun faster, and then the clock hand ticked as it swung across the pendulum. At the very center of the clock, the shortest hand, which had almost never moved, slowly clicked and moved from 0 o'clock to 1 o'clock. The third power of the time pendulum, the hour hand, has finally been activated. Zhang Yi slowly stood up, but his body remained seated in the same spot. His figure no longer possessed a physical form, but a phantom white light, only vaguely transformed into his own appearance due to the confinement of some memory. The entire world around us was completely still, like a huge gray photograph. Zhang Yi turned around and looked at his own body. He could clearly see that there was an invisible line connecting his body to the distance. Zhang Yi took a step forward, and in the next instant, he appeared 360 kilometers away at Edward's location. Edward was still holding his gun, ready to fire, with the trigger already halfway pulled. Zhang Yi just watched him quietly, but he didn't launch an attack on Edward. He thought it, but he couldn't do it at all. Because only human longing can transcend time and space. It can turn back time, it can sever cause and effect, but it is enough to affect any real existence in the material world. At least for Zhang Yi now, he has done it. All he can do is change himself. For example, one could reverse one's state to before the seeds of cause and effect were sown. Zhang Yi simply raised his hand slightly, and in an instant, he severed the causal thread between the two that had occurred in the past. The world's timeline has returned to normal. As Edward pulled the trigger, preparing to deepen the cause and effect of the tides once more, a sudden feeling of loss welled up in his heart. The causal connection he could see deep in his mind suddenly vanished. Click! He fired a blank shot. He stood there blankly, his eyes almost out of focus. Cause and effect had been severed. In his entire life, spanning thousands of years, he had never witnessed such a horrific scene. Cause and effect can be forcibly broken by powerful mental force, but it may disappear on its own before the caster actively cancels the spell. This was beyond his common sense and understanding, and a sudden, extreme chill ran through his body. Could it be that a transcendent being exists in this place? Can it reverse the cause and effect of the world? An extreme chill enveloped Edward's body. Without any hesitation, he turned around and flew desperately towards the outside of the experimental planet. He no longer wanted to kill Zhang Yi, nor did he care about anything here anymore. All he wanted now was to escape. Deep within the experimental planet, Zhang Yi slowly opened his eyes. He felt as if several extremely thin sewing needles were piercing his frontal lobe, causing excruciating pain. However, he forcibly suppressed this pain because, through countless experiments in the past, he had gradually become able to accept this feeling. He stood up and looked in the distance. "Please wait for me a moment." Immediately, he took a step forward, and the boundless realm expanded to 5 kilometers, allowing him to rapidly chase after Edward in the direction he had fled. Everyone stared blankly at his departing figure. Everyone wanted to chase after him, but who could catch up with him? Of course, there are people such as another Black Knight-level master of spatial abilities, time and space, who was present at the scene. Looking at Zhang Yi's figure, Shirkong could already sense the presence of cause and effect on him, which made his eyes shine with a dazzling light, the excitement of discovering something that greatly interested him. Brush. His speed was comparable to Zhang Yi's. He vanished from his spot and quickly gave chase. This time, Zhang Yi was completely determined to kill Edward. He believed that the other party's method of disintegration and escape could be used indefinitely. The reason Zhang Yi didn't pursue him earlier was because he believed he had more important things to do. But now Edward has crossed his line, and even if he has to put everything else aside, he is going to take Edward's life right here. Chapter 2890. My sword is not ineffective when a top-tier space-type ability user is chasing someone with all their might. That person has almost no chance of escaping. Especially when Zhang Yi is in a berserk state, his ability to hunt down enemies is even more terrifying than usual. He remembered the way he came very clearly, so he didn't need to figure out the direction. He just followed the empty area and headed straight for the surface of the experimental star. He no longer found the desolate puppets he encountered along the path troublesome. He raised his hand and directly activated the formless realm, forcibly taking them into the netherworld for sealing. What is Edward doing at this moment? Edward is running away. He realizes danger is approaching. However, the entire experimental planet is fraught with danger. Without a spaceship, relying solely on the power of their battle armor, they could only fly to other nearby celestial bodies. But Edward couldn't care less about that. He had to escape this place immediately. People feel immense fear when they encounter things beyond their comprehension. Especially after reaching this level, the sense of self is incredibly strong. Seeing that Shirkong had come to watch the show, Zhang Yi said directly, "Since you want to come watch the show, then give me directions and tell me where that guy is?" Shirkong laughed and said, "No problem." The two top-tier space manipulation ability users joining forces made the chase much easier. Soon, when Zhang Yi appeared on the surface of the experimental star, he was only about 100 kilometers away from Edward. The outside area was exceptionally open, and his movements became much easier as he tried to escape into space. That chilling killing intent was even more pronounced when there was nothing to obstruct it. Edward felt as if he were being stared at by a wild beast. His head sank, and without looking back, he sped away. Zhang Yi remained silent, but repeatedly closed the distance between the two of them. Soon, the distance will only get closer and closer. 100 kilometers, 80 kilometers, 50 kilometers, 30 kilometers. No matter how Edward transforms into a bat and flies at top speed, he can't outrun space. He shouted to the back of the gate, "Chaos, I admit I was wrong this time, and I can make it up to you. The Starry Sky corridor is fraught with danger. Don't waste any more time on me." Zhang Yi silently took out the Crimson Super Bioweapon, Godslayer. "I've already given you one chance, but you didn't cherish it, so this time you're going to die. You don't actually think that I couldn't kill you the 2 times I let you go before, do you? I simply don't want to waste my time on you. But you keep courting death. Wouldn't it be unfair not to kill you for your actions?" With its wings spread wide, the two supernatural powers of time and space simultaneously exerted their force, sealing off all possible angles from which it could escape. The sword was slowly pulled open, and a terrifying power from the netherworld surged out like a tide, then transformed into an incomparably sharp arrow in Zhang Yi's palm. Despite the vast distance, no matter how Edward flew, the arrows, like the final chapter of fate, were fired forward. Edward swung his hand back, and the spider lily unleashed a powerful force, colliding fiercely with the arrow of the final chapter of destiny. However, with the blessing of the divine weapon, Zhang Yi's arrow was truly terrifying. The aftershock of the force shattered his supernatural bullet, and then, with undiminished momentum, it struck his body. Even the residual energy sent Edward flying hundreds of kilometers away, and cracks began to appear in his armor. No! How can this guy's power be so terrifying? What he holds is the supreme biological weapon of the Titan race. Damn it! Those useless idiots, they're good for nothing but causing trouble. What is the significance of Zhang Yi wielding the God-slaying token? Equivalent to a top-tier, dual-attribute Black Knight level inhuman, wielding a biological weapon with destructive power approaching that of a Black Knight in battle. The combined effect of these two abilities is far more complex than simply 1 + 1 is equal to 2. That kind of blood self-destruction for escape cannot be used continuously in a short period of time, otherwise it will cause irreversible and huge damage to himself. Edward had no choice. He gritted his teeth and decided to fight Zhang Yi to the death. "Chaos, don't think you're so great. My sword is just as sharp as it once was. The previous cause and effect were severed, leaving Edward completely baffled. However, with Zhang Yi right in front of him, he could easily activate his ability a second time. His eyes were fixed on Zhang Yi, and the power of life binding was activated. He only needed to use his ultimate thought to connect the cause and effect between the two. Zhang Yi did not dodge at all, and the causal link between the two was established. Even if Edward had his eyes closed and pulled the trigger, the bullet would still hit Zhang Yi's body. He raised his pistol and fired 3 bullets in quick succession, aiming directly at Zhang Yi without deliberately targeting him. The bullet's trajectory was not seen, and when it reappeared, it was already outside Zhang Yi's body. This wasn't the first time Zhang Yi had been attacked by this kind of power, so he dealt with it without any confusion, forcefully using the power of the Taishu bathrobe to block the attack of 3 supernatural bullets. At that very moment, just as time and space stared wide-eyed, eager to see how Zhang Yi would untie the causal link between the two, the cause and effect between them was broken so abruptly. Edward stood there, stunned, his eyes wide, unable to believe what he was seeing. Time and space were also puzzled because he hadn't seen or felt anything. Just as Zhang Yi could not sense his ability to perceive things in the surrounding 3-dimensional area using spatial perception. What exactly did he do? Kong frowned deeply. This was beyond his comprehension. Edward roared in terror. How did you do that? Why is it that the cause and effect between you and me has already been formed? Unless I cancel it myself, or you kill me, this ability cannot simply disappear. What exactly did you do? Even if he encountered a queen-level powerhouse who could crush and annihilate him with absolute strength, it would be impossible for his abilities to disappear so easily. This almost negates everything about Edward, negates the value of his existence. This filled Edward with both terror and rage. When a person is in a state of extreme fear, they will generate anger and try to suppress their inner fear of Zhang Yi's unknown ability through angry roars. Zhang Yi simply looked at him calmly, without offering any explanation. His third ability, the ability activated when the clock hand turns, is, "What you keep in mind will surely come to pass." Chapter 2891, Killing Edward. The time pendulum has 3 powers. The second hand represents the foresight of the future, and the minute hand represents the stillness of time. However, it's also true that he can't actually make the entire universe quiet because of him, because the energy required to do so is unimaginable to anyone. Therefore, the skill, Azure Sky Moment, of the hour and minute hand is to accelerate itself to the speed of light, forming a state of relative stillness with the entire universe. In that instant, I became the eternity of the entire universe. So, going a step further, what does the hour hand represent? That's right, it's about traveling through time and going back in time. There is no carbon-based life form in this world that could actually turn back time in the entire universe. There is only one substance that can truly transcend time and space, and that is S-longing. Therefore, when Zhang Yi realized this, he was able to make his consciousness leave his physical body and return to the past. And the cause and effect that occur in the future are naturally severed as time reverses. There's not much Zhang Yi can do with this ability now because it's too much for a supermodel. He can only have a certain impact on his own physique. For example, if this ability is activated at the very moment of suffering a fatal wound, it can allow him to avoid the damage. The reversal of causality forms a nearly unsolvable underlying structure of the universe. Zhang Yi drew his judgment longbow and unleashed his strongest attack, aiming directly at Edward. The crimson bow emitted a dazzling light, and terrifying energy fluctuations swept in all directions. This commotion attracted the attention of all the monsters within a radius of hundreds of kilometers, and of course, it also drew the attention of many wild monsters, causing them to rush over here. But Zhang Yi didn't care about any of that. He just wanted to kill this guy. The final chapter of Destiny unfolds. An arrow is released. With an imposing and inescapable aura, it arrived before Edward in an instant. Edward's expression changed drastically. Almost without hesitation, his body rapidly expanded on the spot. then shot out indiscriminately in all directions as billions of blood beads. Blood demon disintegration is his strongest survival skill. This time, Zhang Yi didn't rush to chase after it, because all of this was simply his premonition of the future. Using the power of the time hand, he confirmed that Edward could use blood demon disintegration again. He abandoned the direct attack and instead used the phaseless realm and his opponent to close the distance. Edward would not use this trick unless absolutely necessary, because if used in large quantities, it can also cause damage to him. Even for a vampire of the Black Knight level, blood cannot be replenished indefinitely, and there is clearly no donor in this area who can provide him with blood. It was this tactic of staying far behind without launching an attack that made Edward even more panicked, because he had never faced Zhang Yi head-on, and he was even less aware of the progress Zhang Yi had made now that he had been promoted to the Black Knight level. When the distance between the two came to within a kilometer, they finally reached Edward's killing line. Zhang Yi's lips curled into a smile, and the boundless realm was activated in an instant, forcibly pulling Edward, who was thousands of meters away, to his front. Edward's vision shifted, and he felt a tremendous chill envelop his entire body from behind. Without the slightest hesitation, he immediately prepared to explode his body and activate the blood demon disintegration technique to escape. But the next moment, the space in front of them completely changed color, the infinite sword domain. A huge, enclosed space made up of countless blue energy swords trapped him and Zhang Yi inside. Domain-type skills are the forte of spatial ability users, and almost every top spatial ability user possesses a unique domain of their own. Zhang Yi's boundless sword domain is the most violent and purest offensive domain. Once the target is trapped, there is no choice but to kill him or be killed by him. When Edward was trapped in this sword-shaped area, he knew there was no way out. "Chaos, are you really going to push me to this point?" Edward roared. His vampire fangs bared menacingly, his former elegance and aristocratic air completely vanished. On his snow-white skin, thick, long blue veins bulged out. For those who are subject to rules, the upper limit of their abilities is as high as the lower limit, because once its rules are broken, its own combat ability is actually very weak. Zhang Yi stared at him, then slowly lowered her right hand. Splash! Black chains were wrapped around his fingertips, twisting and intertwining with a black demonic blade. As a close combat weapon, the Divine Refinement's power index has reached a height of 12,000 points under Zhang Yi's constant feeding. Although in terms of breaking through solids, it cannot compare to the Eternal Judgment Sword. However, if we consider him as a superhuman, his abilities are actually more useful in combat. Boom! The gate to the Netherworld opened directly behind Zhang Yi. The flowing river of the Netherworld is the purest antimatter energy, gushing out like a waterfall and concentrating on Zhang Yi's demonic blade. Sensing that terrifying aura, Edward desperately tried to escape, but he was forever trapped within the sword's boundaries. "No. Spare me, Chaos. My vampire clan is willing to establish a permanent peaceful relationship with your Huashu kingdom, and there will be no more war. Please don't kill me. If I die, the vampires will not let you off the hook. Think about the consequences. I'll do anything you ask, just spare my life. I'm sorry, I won't trust someone who has tried to kill me multiple times, so you're dead today." Zhang Yi's eyes were cold and ruthless. He raised the demonic blade with both hands and unleashed a fierce slash towards the front. The underworld is destroyed. This slash was not made with a narrow blade, but rather as if a river of the underworld was gushing out from the tip of his blade. Like a giant tsunami, it roared across the entire space, obscuring everything, soaring thousands of meters high before crashing straight down. Within this space, which is neither too big nor too small, there are no blind spots. Even with Edward's blood demon disintegration technique, he couldn't escape Zhang Yi's attack. "No!" Edward roared in alarm, raising his spider lily pistol and firing wildly at the Netherworld River in front of him. However, all his attacks failed to even create a ripple, as they were completely swallowed up by the vast Netherworld River. "No. I can't die. I am a vampire genius, a talent that only appears once every tens of millions of years. I slept for countless years in the dark underground, only to awaken in this era and forge my own glory. How could I possibly perish here? Chapter 2892. Edward finally learned what fear was. He was angry, roared, and resentful. Everyone felt they should be the protagonist of this world, especially those talents who had reached the level of Black Knights, so their reactions to death were particularly intense. But all of this was ultimately swallowed up by that enormous, terrifying black tsunami. Edward died, killed instantly by Zhang Yi in one move. Those with ability based on rules are like this, extremely strong and extremely weak. Within the Sword domain, only his remaining primordial power floated. The river of the Netherworld slowly flowed back. They do not belong to this world, and will eventually be rejected by the forces of this world, ultimately needing to return to the Netherworld. Zhang Yi raised his hand and absorbed Edward's original power, directly integrating it into his own body. The Black Knight's essence was extremely pure, and when it collided with his own power, one could feel the intense unwillingness of the opponent before his death. Zhang Yi needs some time to completely purify its original power and then transform it into his own. By then, his superpower index will have increased to at least 65,000 points. At this rate, if I want to reach the Black Queen level, the threshold of 70,000 points, I would need to kill at least 3 more ability users of the same level. Zhang Yi muttered to himself. However, this is something we can only think about for now. If it weren't for the combined attack by the people of the clan, he wouldn't have been able to openly kill them. Moreover, from his journey through the Starry Sky Corridor, he had already realized that killing a Black Knight-level ability user face-to-face was indeed far too difficult. The boundless Sword domain was unleashed, and the roars outside resounded as one. A large number of wild puppets were attracted by the battle energy fluctuations here and gathered here. Space-time remained remarkably calm in the face of them, constantly using its spatial abilities to exile them to distant regions without colliding with them. You've finally finished. Shouldn't we leave this place too? Shirkong smiled and said to Zhang Yi, "They're not stupid. They don't want to get entangled with these guys." Zhang Yi nodded. "Let's go. We should go back." 2 top-tier spatial ability users, one in front of the other, sped towards the underground world. Not long after Zhang Yi and his group left, in this city forged from metal, a figure dressed entirely in black and wearing a metal bird beak mask appeared. He sensed the powerful energy fluctuations around him, and his eyes beneath the mask gradually turned a terrifying blood red. On the underground of the experimental planet, a group of people walked slowly from a distance, their steps unhurried, as if they were on vacation. At the very front was a being covered in gray-green armor and with 3 heads. Vishnu, one of the 3 chieftains of the Trinity, appeared in this place. Beside him, besides several powerful 3-headed warriors closely following him, were the 8 dragons from the kingdom of Bharata. Indra, barefoot and dressed in a battle robe in the style of the Bharata people, walked forward step by step with a solemn and dignified appearance. Throughout their journey, their team appeared calm and composed, as if they had never experienced any major battles. Emperor Shur raised his head and looked at the buildings of the experimental planet around him. Because this is a huge experimental site, there is no trace of life here. Everything is cold and frightening. His eyes shimmered with a faint golden light, and if you looked closely, you could see that his eyes were unfocused, as if he were not looking at what was in front of him, but at a scene in the future. "So, have you seen cause and effect here?" Vishnu asked calmly. Indra glanced at Vishnu and replied with a smile. "I see a special future here, and destiny is guiding me toward a deeper direction." After returning from the moon, Vishnu and Indra's abilities were further enhanced. Although he is still far from reaching the level of a Black Knight, he has been granted an even more powerful ability, namely good luck. Those who can see the future can avoid all misfortunes. He couldn't clearly see what was about to happen, but he was able to follow the guidance of fate and act entirely based on his own feelings. Because of this approach, they were able to act more calmly than other teams. They hadn't even encountered many wild puppets along the way. From the perspective of the 3D interface, the direction they are moving in is the direction Zhang Yi and his group are in. However, Zhang Yi and his group relied on the exploration of spatial ability users and the intrusion of top hackers, while Di Shi and his group relied purely on this guy's instincts and luck. Vishnu couldn't help but exclaim, "The Star Clan has quite the grand vision. Even at the height of our three-headed clan's power, creating such an experimental planet entirely composed of special metals would have been no easy feat. And this is only a section of the Star Corridor. I believe that in the deeper areas, there must be even more terrifying and powerful beings created by the Star Clan." Upon hearing this, Indra's eyes flickered slightly, and he reminded him, "D is deeper, and even I cannot see it. My intuition tells me that it is best not to go there lightly." Vishnu's 3 serpent heads looked at him simultaneously, staring intently at his face, and then slowly nodded. "If we can get everything we want here, then this trip will have been worthwhile." The 3-headed clan is not yet confident enough to believe that they can rival the legendary strongest race. As they talked, they followed the lead of Emperor Shi and headed forward. Suddenly, Indra stopped in his tracks. The future he saw was filled with illusory afterimages, as if something was being forcibly distorted, or as if something outside of fate was breaking his predictions, etc. He suddenly spoke. Everyone looked at him, their eyes full of curiosity. "Something seems to be getting closer." His voice was very soft, and everyone who heard it immediately tensed up. Because something that can influence one's destiny is bound to be something to be very afraid of. Sure enough, from the vast space ahead, at the edge of the visible horizon, the once brightly lit boundary quickly turned dark. The sky turned completely black, so dark that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. In order to gain a faint field of vision, one must concentrate one's extraordinary energy at the location of the pupil. From the end of the sky, a humanoid creature slowly walked over. The way he walks alone gives people a strong sense of oppression. It was as if the Demon King had made his appearance. Chapter 2893 Vishnu makes his move. Vishnu flicked his tongue slightly. Is he the guardian of this experimental planet? Indra, look at this fellow and tell me what kind of being he is. Yes, Your Majesty Vishnu. Golden light flickered in his eyes as he stared intently at the black figure in the distance. The secret technique of time is activated, time is deduced, and the coming of is foreseen. Thus, through the scene of coming, one can judge what the opponent possesses. After only a second of looking at the other person, Indra's pupils suddenly contracted, and his face showed an expression of utter astonishment. This guy, he can't even see through fate. What did you say? Even Vishnu was surprised. Everything that exists in this world is within fate, and what is outside of fate is truly unimaginable. The first image that came to mind for Di Shirtian was Zhang Yi, because Zhang Yi is someone whose future he could not have predicted. Could it be that guy Zhang Yi? Just as he was filled with such doubt, the black figure slowly walked up to them. No one could clearly see his face. He seemed to be surrounded by darkness, pitch black and murky, as if covered by a faint layer of armor, but his face was completely obscured. The creature that pursued them to this place was the Type 2 wild puppet, the Void, released by the Experimental Stars Intelligence System. Su simply opened his eyes slightly and glanced at them. In the endless darkness, those eyes were as deep as the starry sky. Unexpectedly, there was no murderous intent in it, only an extreme indifference. You shouldn't have come here. Now that you've arrived, then die. As soon as he finished speaking, he opened his right hand to the crowd. A terrifying energy condensed into a black sphere in his palm and suddenly exploded forward with a roar. That terrifying power had clearly reached the level of a black knight. Vishnu's eyes narrowed. Everyone, step back. The snake's left head suddenly opened its mouth wide and spewed out a beam of green supernatural energy. A surge of energy, carrying a rapid and aggressive force, collided violently with the illusory energy. This toxin can erode and corrode the energy body. However, after colliding with the void, the two actually entered a state of mutual annihilation. In just a moment, After touching the void, Vishnu's attack seemed to have encountered its natural enemy and was quickly swallowed up. Could this guy also be a wild puppet, capable of devouring the energy of others? Vishnu had fought against origami before, so he readily acknowledged the opponent's methods. He gave orders to everyone around him. You are not allowed to use your hands. Ineffective attacks will only charge him. All of you, retreat to a safe distance. Indra, you stay here and assist me from the sidelines. Help me find his weakness. All the geese immediately obeyed the order and retreated. Indra opened a golden umbrella and hung it above his head, causing it to spin at a constant speed. The golden curtains that hung down formed a powerful defense. He doesn't need to worry about being attacked, because he only needs to follow the guidance of fate to avoid death. However, when faced with the void, his time prophecy could trap him in a chaotic and distorted state. It was as if the other party was a cloud of black mist, and it was impossible to see anything clearly. This is extremely strange. Even the most powerful being, Indra, has encountered this situation where he can't see anything at all. He was very curious about what this guy in front of him was. Vishnu had already taken to the air, his serpentine body moving swiftly through the air as if swimming in water. With a few flashes, the enormous serpentine body arrived high in the sky. A space-type ability user? Vishnu stared coldly at the black figure below, his mind frantically recalling his battle with the wild golem. This thing cannot be killed unless its core is sealed. The previous type of desolate puppet had no intelligence and only knew how to act on instinct, but this guy was clearly not that kind of mindless thing. Is this thing really an advanced level wild puppet? Or is it some other life form? Let me give it a try. Vishnu's figure suddenly became illusory, and he swiftly ran around in midair. Although his speed couldn't match Zhang Yi's boundless realm, it was still incredibly fast, quickly creating layers of afterimages in midair. Centered on the void, within a radius of 1 kilometer, he formed a huge cage around the area. A subtle change is emerging. He stood still, coldly watching this scene. He wasn't in a hurry to make a move, but waited for the other party to launch the first attack. Even though he is a Type 2 wild puppet, his current combat level is only at the Black Knight level. Their true strength lies not in immediate combat, but in constantly adapting to the opponent's abilities through battle, generating corresponding advancements, and thus restraining the enemy. Buzz. The space suddenly began to tremble violently. When Vishnu's high-speed spinning stopped, a gigantic, terrifying serpent with a gigantic head appeared in the area. Vishnu's body appeared to be over 10 kilometers long, and it coiled around and around, completely sealing void within it. Although this is not his true form, but merely a manifestation of a superpower, it looks incredibly real and terrifying. Void serpent formation, spatial strangulation. With a low shout, Vishnu unleashed a powerful spatial force that began to crush from all directions toward the central void. This attack has no blind spots. Any opening in the body will be instantly exploited. Sure enough, the cracking sound of breaking continued. The void's body seemed to be being torn apart by a neutron star, and its bones collapsed and shattered. But soon, the broken flesh and bones regenerated at an even faster rate, and with each transformation, its body became even stronger. Su raised his palm, aiming it at the direction of the snake's head, and unleashed a simple, unadorned black energy cannon at its head. Vishnu opened the serpent's mouth and immediately launched a counterattack. Boom! The two engaged in a simple and unadorned exchange of waves. However, what followed was a barrage of attacks coming rapidly from Su's palm like a hail of bullets. A rain of black energy cannons arrived in front of Vishnu in the blink of an eye. The speed of the attack exceeded Vishnu's ability to react, but he remained calm. On its massive body, the snake's scales suddenly unfurled, emitting a metallic clanging sound. Serpent Scale, Heavenly Garment. Chapter 2894 Defying Fate and Rebirth. The original dark green snake scales shimmered with layers of eerie light. The energy cannons that bombarded him were all distorted and dissolved, eventually disappearing without a trace. At this moment, Indra's voice finally rang in Vishnu's ears. Lord Vishnu, please be careful. If the fight continues, you will show signs of death. The pupils of the head in Vishnu's eye contracted sharply. You mean I am his opponent? At this moment, Indra finally found a way to deal with the power of the void. Although he could not see through the fate of void itself, he could see Vishnu's Raja coming to fight void. If the trajectory of Vishnu's death can be reversed, NYU has a chance to defeat void. But this guy doesn't look that scary, Vishnu replied. Indra said, I see it. You will be devoured by your own energy. It can absorb your power and retaliate in your own way. I understand. If pure energy blasting works completely, then I'll seal him away. Vishnu's scales spread out like wings, making a clanging sound. An eerie halo emanated from each of the scales. The enormous figure rapidly circled, causing a restless, rumbling sound across the earth. A strange, piercing line suddenly appeared in Vishnu's eyes, his cold, vertical pupils. In an instant, that vertical pupil was split into two from one, then into four, and then into 8. A perfectly good pair of eyes has somehow become compound eyes that reflect an infinite number of images. Spatial technique, domain of eternal reincarnation. As his gaze swept across the space before him, invisible lines appeared. The area between the two sides was directly divided by the location of the void, and the originally neat space was stacked up like building blocks. Su suddenly sensed that the giant snake in front of him was growing larger and larger at an extremely terrifying speed. The eyes of those three heads coldly looked down at him, growing taller and larger, as if they were reaching straight to the heavens. In a short while, the giant snake had grown to stand tall and imposing. But soon, Su realized something was wrong, because the buildings around him were also growing larger. So, it means that it got bigger but I got smaller? It's another space-based ability. The space he was in floated high up, like a giant empty block. The void was sealed in the core spatial region, and outside of that, there were 2,999 other spaces that tightly enveloped it. He wants to escape, but he must break through the seals layer by layer. Trying to use space to restrict my movements is foolish. A cold, mocking smile appeared on Su's lips. You think I'm like those brainless idiots, right? You're far too naive. Su raised his right hand, and in the next instant, his palm slashed down like a long knife. A surge of black spatial power erupted, striking the spatial barrier that bound him. Splash. The spatial barrier shattered instantly after the violent impact. Su said calmly, the most obvious difference between Type 1 and Type 2 is that Type 1 has no brain and can only passively absorb energy and undergo adaptive changes. However, we Type 2 users can choose our own ability attributes. In other words, we can become the possessor of any ability if we so choose. Vishnu watched helplessly as the hollow manifested spatial abilities, breaking through one of his seals. This surprised him immensely. A space-type ability user? How is that possible? I had never sensed this kind of aura from him before. If he really is a space-type ability user, why did he obediently let me seal him away before? This type of desolate puppet is obviously the same. Because the spatial seal did not produce any direct attack on the wild puppet, according to the understanding of the first type of wild puppet, it was impossible for it to make any adaptive changes. Unless Vishnu suddenly realized something. Does this mean they can decide the direction of their adaptation themselves? Vishnu's surprise lasted only a moment. He has lived for a very long time and has seen countless people with special abilities. Even when encountering those slain puppets, he never lost his composure. He said coldly, "You only have the ability to possess many kinds of abilities, which does not mean you have become stronger. Indra, keep your eyes fixed on me and remind me when I am about to make a mistake. It would be a disgrace if we couldn't beat him even in a 2-on-1 situation." Indra nodded. "Vishnu, let's choose to seal him away. Perhaps we have another way to destroy him, or at least make him a problem for us." He spoke his mind, and Vishnu was moved. During the time it took for the two to speak, Su Jing used his hand as a spatial blade to cleave open one sealed space after another. However, Vishnu did not show any sign of panic. He coldly replied, "Do you think my domain is merely capable of trapping you? I'd like to see if you murderers are truly invincible." An eerie light flashed simultaneously in the eyes of his three heads. A powerful force erupted from him, permeating the 3,000 independent and isolated worlds in the void. Resign against fate. Legend has it that every time a snake sheds its skin, it is reborn. Each individual of the three-headed race molts only once every 1,000 years, and each molt leaves behind a shadow of itself possessing the strength of its prime. Besides inheriting the basic abilities of the three powers of the three-headed clan, the Shadow Transformer can also move freely and even undergo rebirth again. He only needs to lie dormant for a short while to transform into thousands of demise-level figures capable of destroying a nation. If this ability is applied to a target, it will produce a surprising effect, helping the opponent shed their skin. Each layer of skin peeled away weakens the opponent's strength, potentially reducing them from their peak to a helpless infant. As Su Zheng launched his attack, he suddenly sensed a strange power emerging in the space. This was a domain entirely under Vishnu's control. When the power of the Nowhere manifestation invaded, he was unable to resist. Su felt as if his body was being torn apart by something. It's like simultaneously using 3,000 carving knives to cut open his own skin, forcibly peeling off his own epidermis. Chapter 2895 The Core of the Wild Puppet Snap. A crisp sound seemed to ring in my ears. Su suddenly realized that his feelings were not an illusion, but that someone had really peeled off a layer of skin from his body. A very thin layer of human skin made him look almost exactly like him, but his own power had been severely weakened. Vishnu said quietly, "The most powerful part of the Devis is the core of the Devis, but your physical body isn't that indestructible, is it?" Su's gaze suddenly sharpened. The torn human skin seemed to be locked by some kind of rule, turning into pure white in midair, then shattering into powder, completely inactive and unable to reintegrate into the body. The idea that the wild puppet cannot be killed is a false proposition. It's just that its cellular activity and physical strength are too terrifying, and ordinary segments simply cannot completely erase it. However, if a powerful warrior of Black Knight rank were to unleash all their power on a wild puppet, they could only obliterate every single cell within it to kill it completely. Now, Vishnu is attacking him using the characteristics of his physical body. Before Su could even react, the second skinning process began. For the first time, Void deployed a spatial shield around its body to block Vishnu's attack. Seeing him take a defensive stance, Vishnu smiled. This also shows that these golems are not capable of withstanding attacks indefinitely, but rather of adaptive evolution. Once I weaken your power to a certain extent, even if I can't kill you, I can seal you away. At that point, there will be a way to kill you. As Vishnu spoke, he suddenly opened his three mouths wide. His tongue extended out, and in midair, it transformed into one small snake after another, identical to the original. These are the remnants of his previous molted form. Although they appear to be only about a meter long, they all possess powerful destructive force. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of small snakes swiftly swam through the space, crossing the spatial barrier of the domain and entering the sealed land of the void. Su looked at the small snakes that had come to his side, a look of seriousness flashing in his eyes. Just as the small snakes opened their mouths and lunged at him, Indra suddenly shouted, "Your Majesty Vishnu, stop." Vishnu's eyes narrowed, and he immediately controlled the small snakes, stopping their attack. "What's going on? If you use this move, that guy will absorb your flesh and blood and gain control of your abilities. At that point, you will be doomed." Indra quickly reminded him. At that moment, Su, who had been putting on a tense look, revealed a hint of regret in his eyes. In an instant, he vanished from his spot and appeared before a three-headed serpent using his spatial teleportation ability. He stretched out his large hand and controlled it in his palm. At this moment, a terrible gap suddenly appeared in his palm, from which a bunch of blood-red flesh sprouts extended, like some kind of parasite, invading the three-headed serpent's body. However, the three-headed serpent nimbly dodged the attack and retreated to a considerable distance. So that's how it is. You want to devour my body and abilities, is that it? The three-headed serpent spoke human language and was identical to Vishnu in form. These molted forms are essentially the three-headed serpent's physical body, sharing the same spiritual will as the serpent and possessing formidable combat power on their own. Within the space it creates, it can move freely in any direction. As long as one remains vigilant, it is impossible to catch it. Let the molting continue. The subsequent attacks landed on the void. Su turned his head and took a deep look at Indra in the distance, as if he had realized something. What does that mean? He murmured to himself, the strong people in this world today are even more powerful than I imagined. His reaction was extremely fast. The spatial barrier he had created to defend against Vishnu's attack began to expand rapidly, growing larger and larger. Ultimately, it directly collided with Vishnu's spatial domain. The two different spatial forces, upon contact, immediately triggered a spatial collapse. Vishnu immediately understood Void's idea. It was a direct clash of power with him, a spatial impact against a spatial form. Oh, but if someone who has temporarily adapted to the power of space forces were to forcefully clash with an experienced space-type expert like me, you wouldn't gain any advantage. And that's exactly what he said. Su completely converted his supernatural ability into the spatial system, and his energy consumption was significantly greater during each breakthrough collision. But right now, he doesn't care about the price at all. 1 floor, 2 floors, 3 floors. As more and more spatial barriers were broken, the resulting spatial collapse and fluctuations impacted the void itself. However, each time he endured pain, he became stronger, and his mastery of the spatial domain became increasingly proficient. Finally, after a long battle in space, he broke through Vishnu's seal on him in the simplest and most brutal way. However, when he appeared before Vishnu, he was already covered in wounds. While he can repair his physical body, the essential damage caused by the backlash from his own energy attacks cannot be recovered. However, the tactics of the bluff are very simple. If he can break the opponent's sealing skill, then even if he is at a disadvantage in the contest of power for a short period of time. But if given enough time to evolve by absorbing the opponent's energy, he will be able to turn the tide of battle. Spear of Space. Su raised his hand, and from his palm, a ball of spatial energy extended into a spear hundreds of meters long. He raised his spear and hurled it with all his might toward Vishnu's head. In an instant, the spatial spear traversed the sky and arrived before Vishnu's head. The spatial piercing spear can pierce through any barrier. It is a deadly trump card. Vishnu quickly erected a powerful spatial barrier in front of him in an attempt to resist. Unexpectedly, when the two sides collided, the spatial barrier was directly pierced by the spatial spear. With a thud, one of his heads was pierced by the spear, leaving a gaping, bloody hole. Has this guy's mastery of spatial power reached such a level? Vishnu was horrified when a head was destroyed. If I give him more time, I'm afraid his spatial manipulation ability will be even better than mine, and then there really won't be any chance of victory. No, there is still hope. Chapter 2896 Samuel's Incarnation. Just then, Indra's voice rang out again in my ear. If you can cooperate with me, perhaps we will have a chance to wipe you out directly. Vishnu looked at the void, and there was really nothing he could do. Has 1,000 ways to attack, but facing this hollow that can evolve infinitely, doesn't dare to use them at all. Thousands of molting shadow snakes were watching them intently from all sides, yet they were powerless to do anything about it. What other way is there? Just tell us. If we keep dragging this out, we're all going to die here. Indra's eyes flashed, but there was a certain excitement in them. Don't give any time to evolve. Seal as quickly as possible, and then help devour it. It's hard to imagine that the word devour would come from the word of Indra. But as soon as these words were spoken, Vishnu's eyes changed. You want to use your power to help you become stronger, duh? Since Indra returned from the moon, Vishnu no longer regarded him as a servant. There are many reasons for this. I vaguely sensed that Indra's attitude towards me was no longer as devout as it used to be. The relationship between the two parties has shifted from one of subordination to one of cooperation. Indra said unhurriedly. I see 1,000 futures, but there is only one possibility, that we can survive this calamity. Then we will cooperate with you. Otherwise, you will soon be unable to suppress this desolate puppet. One of Vishnu's 3 heads had already been destroyed, so Vishnu had no choice but to believe what Indra had said, because immediately afterward, saw the void pass through the void and rapidly approach. A massive number of molting shadow snakes surged towards the monstrous head, spewing out venomous fangs infused with spatial toxins. Once those venomous fangs hit their mark, they can implant a potent toxin into the victim's body that can seal their special abilities. Unfortunately, Su almost completely ignored this. He raised his hand as a knife, slicing each of the molting snakes into pieces, blood spurting into the air. All right, I agree. Vishnu had no choice but to say. That's great. Thank you so much for your help. Di Shirtian's lips curled into a triumphant smile. Now, I hope you can seal it again. It won't take long, just 1 minute will be enough. That shouldn't be difficult for you. Not difficult to do? That's a joke. Vishnu would love to curse him. The current hollow has developed a strong tolerance to the spatial power of the nether and can even form spatial spears with strong piercing capabilities that even the nether cannot do. If given more time, Vishnu would really only be able to run away, and he wouldn't even be able to run away. However, for now, S power is still above S. Roar. A terrifying roar came from Vishnu's GA. It spread its enormous serpentine branches, and an invisible spatial fluctuation, like a tidal wave, rolled out in all directions. The space where the void passed was also affected by this spatial shockwave, and the body of the void was actually pulled out directly from the void. The 3 tribulations closed loop. Vishnu activated his strongest spatial sealing ability. It opens wide, and within the vast fan-shaped area in front of it, powerful turbulence is generated in the space. Visible to the naked eye, the illusory body was stretched and twisted arbitrarily, like an earthworm. In this spatial turbulence, even it cannot perform displacement using the same spatial means. Moreover, a powerful spatial tearing force emanates from Vishnu's aura, like a miniature black hole, twisting and stretching any object that approaches it before devouring and destroying it. But this kind of power cannot last long, because while the void was enduring this tearing sensation, it was slowly beginning to adapt. The 3 cycles of calamity bind us, and we cannot break free in a short time. Make your move, Indra. Vishnu roared. Okay, I'll come. Indra extended the index finger of his right hand and suddenly touched his forehead. Then, with a pft, it actually pierced through Kim's eyebrow. A trickle of blood flowed from between her eyebrows, but the blood flowing from the wound was not bright red, but pitch black, so deep that it seemed to devour everything. An ancient, desolate power, seemingly originating from the beginning of all things, flowed out from that black cave. In an instant, a terrifying pressure arose that terrified everyone. Hollow, who was still getting used to the battle with Vishnu, couldn't help but tremble when he felt that power. He felt that deep within his chest, the core that sustained his power was trembling involuntarily, as if it wanted to detach from his body and escape. What is that thing? For the first time, a look of panic appeared on Su's face. Indra remained silent. Suddenly, a dark shadow emerged from that dark cave. At first, it was just a streak of black light, but in the blink of an eye, it appeared in midair and magnified infinitely. Hiss! A terrifying roar echoed throughout the heavens and earth. The dark shadow loomed over everything, approaching Vishnu and Vishnu's location, as if blotting out the sky. Even Vishnu, whose form had grown to over 10 kilometers in size, felt a chill run down his spine when he saw that object. That's a snake. An enormous snake, black, sacred, and terrifying, shrouded in contradictory forces. Even the menacing scales on its head are clearly visible. This legendary serpent of the realm, Samel, the sin of wrath. The incarnation of Samel, one of the 7 kings of Druk, has actually appeared here. A horrified roar erupted from the void. Drucker? Does this mean our seal is about to be broken again? The serpent's eyes rolled downwards, and when it saw the void, its expression remained unchanged. It simply opened its massive jaws and suddenly lunged downwards to devour everything in its path. The void, firmly controlled by Vishnu, was unable to break free of its restraints and simply fell into the serpent's clutches. After devouring the void, the body of the serpent slowly contracted and then returned to the depths of Emperor Shirtian's eyebrows. The hollow in the eyebrows slowly faded from its dark color, transforming into a red mole. Shirtian slowly closed his eyes, feeling the pure and incomparable power merging into his body. He smiled broadly and let out a pleasant sigh. How wonderful this tastes! Is this the power of the Druk gods? Chapter 2897 The Out-of-Control Thing. Vishnu stared intently at Indra. Did you get this from the moon? Emperor Shur smiled slightly. It's just that I was fortunate enough to receive a little bit of the blessing from the god Druk. You don't need to be too alarmed. Vishnu wasn't stupid either. If the Druk gods truly appear here, everyone in the entire star corridor will likely die. Therefore, that was merely a trace of the power of the world serpent. Staring at Indra, she coldly asked, "How did you obtain this power? Why did Samuel bestow a blessing upon you?" Indra smiled and shook his head. I am simply following the guidance of fate to go there, which is always the most correct choice. As for the reason, we will only know in the future. Vishnu gave Ma a deep look and said nothing more. However, his fear of Indra became even more profound. We need to find a place to recover properly. There might be more than one of these second-form desolate puppet. We can't stay here any longer, because if we encounter another desolate puppet, I'm afraid I won't be able to help you devour it. Vishnu's words have a hidden meaning. After suffering a severe injury and going through a lot of hardship, all the fruits were picked by Indra, who said that it was impossible for him not to have any thoughts about them. But for now, they cannot afford to completely break off relations. On the other side, after Zhang Yi and his group dealt with Edward, they finally faced no further obstacles. They were well aware that all factions were vying to find the core area of this experimental planet as soon as possible and seize all the data. So the men didn't delay any longer and rushed down as fast as they could. Using space-time exploration as a guide, Yang Xinxin and Lu Karen continued their journey, constantly hacking into the entire experimental star network system. Yang Xinxin did it very discreetly. She didn't actively change the underlying code, but only planted a Trojan horse that could play an unexpected role at crucial moments. However, as they moved forward, sensing the crisis, the artificial intelligence of the experimental planet began to fight back. However, those desolate puppets were completely beyond the control of the demons, and ordinary energy weapons could not harm Zhang Yi. They were all devoured by the demons through the dimensional gate. In less than a month, they had already penetrated more than 2,000 kilometers underground. Zhang Yi and his companions slowed down their pace. As they delved deeper into the core area of the underground city, they discovered a great deal of information about the city. The entire planet is a giant factory, and each experimental center occupies an incredibly vast area. Here, we collected a lot of information and gradually learned about the history of these Aragoku, a type of puppet creation. Just as Zhang Yi and his group had suspected, these wild puppet were initially created solely to develop a powerful biological weapon to combat the extremely difficult-to-kill Druk people. Throughout the long years, these wild puppets served as the most important warriors on the front lines. There's one thing I don't quite understand. Looking at these records and documents, Su Peng asked with a puzzled expression. The Druk people have existed for at least 1 billion years longer than the Byak people, so why didn't they develop such biotechnology? Zhang Yi said because destruction is many times easier than construction. Like, you might need to spend a whole day building a sandcastle on the beach, but you can destroy it with just one kick. The Druckers were accustomed to plunder and devouring. They simply lacked the patience to spend hundreds of millions of years slowly developing basic science. Pointing to its own brain, it smiled and said, "The thing the Creator is most glad about is that when it created these beasts, it did not give them great intelligence." Sher Kong couldn't help but sigh. If a creature is created that possesses both great intelligence and astonishing power, then it will definitely go out of control, and even the creator of the creature will not be able to completely control it. Zhang Yi looked at. You mean Star Clan, right? Shirkong smiled slightly. I guess that's what it means. For some reason, Zhang Yi suddenly thought of the younger generation of women. It's strange, really, that humans are such a simple yet complex species. In terms of wisdom alone, they are inferior to the second-generation god of the Aihen tribe. In terms of physique and brute force, they are no match for the Druk people. It's truly unimaginable what the meaning is of the Creator creating us. Could it be that our first generation of humans produced this product of a flawed evolution? That's why the Creator couldn't wait to destroy them early on, just like how the staff in the lab did a failed experiment, then simply threw away the petri dish and started over. This is the willful nature of the Creator. Zhang Yi shook his head, trying not to think about these complicated issues. We haven't yet reached the point of considering racial righteousness. What we want is only for ourselves and for our own sake to ensure that our people can live well. So, what if it's the end of the world? At worst, we'll just run into the depths of the earth like the dragons, or hide in the stars. Whether we're civilized or not is irrelevant to us. Right now, the first thing I need to do is to become stronger. Empress level? No, that's not enough. Perhaps only by reaching the level of a king, existing like the 12 queens of the Silver Moon Empire, can one avoid almost all the risks in this universe and endure forever. The group stopped in their tracks in the huge experimental area. Lu Karen and Yang Xinxin joined forces to hack into the entire experimental area's network and copy all the data. This will take a lot of time. After all, our data transmission technology has not yet reached that level. Zhang Yi and the others stood guard while sending out mechanical life forms to search, hoping to find more valuable items. King Arthur and the others finally had a chance to catch their breath and curiously examined the underground world of this metallic planet. Su Peng walked over, reached into his pocket, and took out a pack of Jinling 12 Beauty cigarettes, picked up 2, and handed one to Zhang Yi. Boss, have a smoke and relax. Zhang Yi glanced at her and said, Oh ho, why are you smoking a slim cigarette now? Su Peng chuckled sheepishly and scratched his head. My Yang said that smoking thin cigarettes is better for your health. Zhang Yi rolled his eyes and took the cigarette from S hand. Su Peng reached out to help Zhang Yi light the cigarette. The minty coolness and a hint of sweetness, along with the bitter taste of the cigarette, melted in his mouth, easing Zhang Yi's tense emotions a little. Boss, this starry sky corridor is really too dangerous. I wonder what the white dragon and black dragon have been through up there. How about we explore this area and then not go any further? Su Peng said with a worried expression. Chapter 2898 Reconstruction of Life. After listening, Zhang Yi glanced at him indifferently. You think you can just say you won't go? If we can't stop the movement of the starry sky corridor, we'll all be doomed when it crashes into the solar system. Su Peng retorted. But if the sky falls, aren't there tall people to hold it up? Those super races are much more powerful than us. Let them go. Fool, the country isn't going to just let us reap the benefits. Don't think that we're the only smart ones in the world and that everyone else is a fool. Upon hearing this, Su Peng sighed helplessly. I feel like we've had such a tough journey, facing hardships at every turn. When will it ever end? Upon hearing this, Zhang Yi exhaled a long puff of smoke and stood there stunned. Yes, it hasn't been easy for us along the way. From the beginning of the apocalypse until today, several years have passed. We don't have many moments of relaxation. Most of the time we're fighting. Zhang Yi suddenly raised his hand and patted Su Peng's shoulder. It'll be soon. After we go back from the starry sky corridor, we can have a good rest for a few years. After the great battle ended, he was certain that many experts from the myriad races that were entrenched in the land would perish. The number of experts from all races who died in the battle around the experimental planet alone is already enormous. Don't be fooled by the fact that few Black Knight-level powerhouses have perished. How many Black Knights are there among all the races? Even for many races, the White Knights are already top-tier combatants. Zhang Yi felt no emotion whatsoever for the deaths of these soldiers. The struggle between races is inherently cruel. Once all these threats are eliminated and they return to planet, their strength will be even greater than that of the myriad races having suffered losses in this battle must also stop to recuperate and rebuild. As for the distant Drucker, whose resurrection is uncertain, based on previous explorations of the seals on Mammon and Samel, it is concluded that the seals will be broken approximately 200 years from now. Zhang Yi thought that if he could live for another 200 years, even if he died later, it wouldn't seem like such a loss. He has always been very open-minded about this. By the way, how are things going with you and your little couple? When this was brought up, Fatty Sue scratched his head a little embarrassedly. Why did we suddenly bring this up? Hey. Zhang Yi's face showed a suspicious expression, and he nudged his waist with his elbow. What's going on between you two? Who was in the room last night? Su Peng's face turned red instantly. It was quite rare to see this little girl being shy. These kinds of things are usually discussed and agreed upon. Why don't we find some time to get him the surgery done? With medical technology so advanced these days, we can get it done in no time. Zhang Yi made a cutting motion by reaching down. Upon hearing this, Su Peng immediately shook his head with a firm expression. No, this is absolutely not allowed. Zhang Yi was puzzled. Why? Do you like fencing that much? Su Peng stared at Zhang Yi with a smug look on his face. Big brother, you don't understand. This is exactly what I want. Zhang Yi's cigarette stopped in midair. His body stiffened for a few seconds before he slowly turned his head and took a deep drag. Your otaku circle is really too chaotic. Zhang Yi shook his head, trying not to think about these complicated issues. He hasn't yet reached the level of racial righteousness. All he wants is for himself and those connected to him to live well. So, what if it's the end of the world? At worst, they'll just run into the depths of the monstrous earth like the dragons, or hide in the stars. Whether they're civilized or not is irrelevant to them. His first priority right now is to become stronger. Empress level? No, that's not enough. Perhaps only by reaching the level of a king, becoming like the 12 queens of the Silver Moon Empire, can one avoid almost all the risks in this universe and survive forever. A group of people stopped in this huge experimental area. Lu Karen and Yang Xinxin joined forces and began to hack into the network of the entire experimental area, copying down all the data. This will take a very long time. After all, their data transmission technology has not yet reached that level. Zhang Yi and others stood guard nearby while sending out mechanical life forms to search, hoping to find more valuable items. King Arthur and the others finally had a chance to catch their breath, and they also looked around the world beneath this metallic planet with curious eyes. Zhang Yi and others continued their investigation in this area. A large amount of experimental data was collected. This was merely the tip of the iceberg of the Star Clan's experiments, yet it brought immense shock to their communities. After reading the document, Zhou Kur's eyes trembled violently. She couldn't help but whisper, "This is simply a reconstruction of life. In fact, these life forms created have already exceeded the scope of humankind." Zhang Yi didn't quite understand these things, so he asked Zhou Kur, "Are these things really as scary as you say?" Zhou Kur looked at Zhang Yi, took a deep breath, and said, "They can no longer even be called carbon-based life forms. These creatures can survive without breathing, eating, or drinking, effectively shutting themselves down and achieving near immortality. When they need to awaken, they can power themselves by consuming everything in their surroundings." Zhang Yi couldn't help but ask, "Don't you even need to drink water?" Zhou Kur nodded. "This is the most terrifying thing. They can granulate the objects they devour and then satisfy all their own needs. This breaks our conventional understanding that carbon-based organisms cannot exist without water." Zhang Yi rubbed his eyebrows. The more he listened, the more it sounded like Drucker. Fortunately, they did not succeed. Otherwise, with the wisdom of the Star Clan and a physical body comparable to Drucker, they would have become the greatest calamity in the entire universe. Yang Xinxin said jokingly, "If they really succeeded, There wouldn't be any fifth or sixth generation descendants like us, so it's not a disaster. Zhang Yi smiled and said, "That's true. A group of people have finished collecting the information." Suddenly, however, Shirkong, who had been watching the commotion from the sidelines, had a glint in his eyes. He looked toward a very distant area to his side and slowly narrowed his eyes. Seeing that his gaze was off, Su Peng said very enthusiastically, "Hey, Mr. Time Travel, what's wrong with you?" Shirkong looked at the kind-faced fat man and smiled faintly. "It's nothing. It's probably just my imagination." He seemed to vaguely sense that something was there, but upon closer inspection, it disappeared. Chapter 2899 Li Chonggong's home ground is full of strange things, which are beyond their understanding, so the spatial perception error is also unexpected. Seeing that there was nothing unusual around them, Zhang Yi called to the others to continue towards the deeper experimental area. After they left, a strange black vortex appeared in the void in the direction that time and space had previously detected. The vortex unfurled in midair, revealing a figure covered in black armor, with a slender body and a bizarre bird head mask on his face. There are 4 people whose combat level exceeds 60,000. These invaders are stronger than I imagined, he muttered to himself. At that moment, the artificial intelligence of the experimental star spoke to him in his ear. Given your current condition, if you force yourself to fight each of them individually, you might not be able to kill them all. It's best to take a safer approach. You must understand, the Type 2 Aragu is still a work in progress. You cannot achieve true immortality. Upon hearing the AI's prompt, a mocking glint flashed in Blackbird's eyes. Don't act like you know everything. You're just a flawed AI. This experimental planet will eventually be taken over by us. You need to provide them with their location. Received instructions. I will provide you with the location of this group of targets in real time throughout the process. The entire experimental planet was within its control range. Although the weapon system had been destroyed, Zhang Yi and his group's every move could not escape its eyes. Blackbird did not launch an attack rashly. Artificial intelligence is right. It has just been revived, and its body has been in a state of prolonged hunger. Although he had already absorbed a large amount of energy substances and killed more than a dozen low-level ability users who had invaded this place, it was still not enough for him to produce a high-intensity adaptive change. But this did not prevent him from having enough confidence to wipe out all the powerful alien warriors in front of him. The blackbird raised its head and slowly closed its eyes. A powerful spiritual will spread from his mind in all directions. Like a silent serpent, it meanders along the narrow passageway inside the experimental star, and like the tide, it spreads to the boundless distance. At this moment, the Type 1 abandoned puppets, who had been wandering aimlessly nearby due to losing their target, suddenly changed their expressions after receiving this sensory signal. They turned around and, as if summoned, swarmed towards the direction where the black bird was. One of the abilities possessed by the Type 2 wild puppet is the ability to control the Type 1 wild puppet, much like a military officer commanding a battlefield. This was part of a perfect plan when the Star Clan created the Wild Puppet Kingdom. It is a mindless Type 1 wild puppet that lacks fear, has strong vitality, and knows how to devour everything, yet can be commanded by a higher-level Type 2 wild puppet. This is exactly what they need, the cheapest and most effective cannon fodder. Zhang Yi and his group continued on their way. Each time they pass through a region, they will stay there for a period of time. The experimental data here is so astonishing that even the scraps left behind by the Star Clan are enough to drive Zhang Yi, Shunfeng, and Luo Qiao crazy. The more they looked, the more alarmed they became, and they began to uncover some tidbits about the strength of a god-level civilization. In comparison, their civilization is practically like that of a primitive race that eats raw meat and drinks blood. Zhang Yi didn't stop, and immediately gave orders to Yang Xinxin, Lu Karen, and the human powerhouses King Arthur and Morana, who came with him. Gather all the information here as quickly as possible. If you encounter any valuable materials, collect them first. Be quick and don't waste time. Everyone nodded and, after receiving the order, immediately began to disperse and take action. Deng Shintong, Li Changgong, Zhu Ke, and others were also among those involved in this operation. They weren't very useful in the previous battles, but they were very proactive in collecting supplies. After all, sometimes you have to show your worth and not let others treat you like a useless person. Now, after Zhang Yi's long-term training, the first and second-rate superhumans of Huashu Kingdom have generally reached an ability index of around 40,000 points. Deng Shintong, Li Changgong, and Zhu Ke traveled together to search a vast area. They entered a ground-based laboratory where the complex mechanical equipment was completely incomprehensible to them. However, the landing combustible provides them with a conversion interface, allowing them to collect data, and the dense data is transmitted very quickly. With nothing else to do, the three of them found a place to sit and chat. Deng Shintong looked at Li Changgong and asked with great curiosity, "You killed so many wild puppets before. How many points has your ability index increased to now?" "Increased by 300 points." Li Changgong didn't hide anything and spoke directly. Upon hearing this, Suzaku and Deng Shintong stared wide-eyed, their eyes filled with an indescribable envy and even a hint of jealousy. "You're really lucky. 3,000 points of superpower index. Many people spend their whole lives cultivating and still can't increase that much." Li Changgong shook his head. "At the very beginning, my talent potential was unlocked, but after killing the wild puppet, I didn't improve as much. This world is fair to all people, and the blessings bestowed by the Creator will not be endless." At this point, Li Changgong looked at Deng Shintong, his eyes full of curiosity, and asked, "And what about you? You've been following Zhang Yi for so many years. The Deng family is practically his original investment. Zhang Yi should have treated you well. So, how much has your strength improved now?" Deng Shintong smiled and said, "Zhang Yi has indeed not helped me all these years. However, as an extraordinary person, relying on or using things to gain strength is ultimately futile." He thought of Zhang Yi and sighed. True strength comes from self-improvement. Otherwise, even if you are given more extraordinary origins, your capacity is insufficient to absorb them. Deng Shintong's words revealed the truth about the advancement of extraordinary individuals. If one's own capacity is insufficient, simply put, if one's talent is insufficient, even if one is forcibly infused with a large amount of otherworldly essence, it will ultimately reach its limit and result in a useless waste. But over the years, I have gradually come to understand this point and no longer rely entirely on Zhang Yi. Now I have also gained some benefits. When this matter was mentioned, Deng Shintong's face showed a calm, yet proud expression. He has now accepted with equanimity that his talent is inferior to that of Zhang Yi and others, and he has long since let go of his arrogance. And it is precisely because of this that opening up to oneself and others truly makes one different from before. Chapter 2900 Jianghan's growth. While the three were talking, suddenly, Li Changgong's eyes flickered, and he looked up at a space several thousand meters above his head. "Something's coming." Upon hearing this, the three who were originally in a resting state immediately switched to a fighting state. Deng Shintong's eyes narrowed, and he pressed his hand on the sword Griffith at his waist. From the breach blasted open above, a rustling sound came, as if something was rapidly approaching. Immediately afterwards, a pale and hideous face was revealed. "Huang puppet." Li Changgong sneered, "Just delivering vegetables to me." With a clang, he drew two swords from his waist. "Don't try to take them from me. These are my prey." He said this, but the next moment, his expression was no longer so relaxed, but rather more solemn and strange. Because from above his head, a large group of wild puppets suddenly fell down with a whoosh like rain. These wild puppets do not appear alone. Similar situations occurred almost immediately, starting in various places throughout the entire region. In the blink of an eye, thousands of wild puppets were seen rushing towards this place in an orderly fashion, as if it were something deliberately done. The sudden appearance of a large number of wild puppets surprised Zhang Yi and his group. Zhang Yi and his team already had a set of effective methods to deal with a small number of wild puppet. However, if these things become numerous, Even a Black Knight-level powerhouse could be devoured alive if they are not careful. Just like a bird, if it encounters a mouse, it will only feel annoyed, not afraid. But what if there were thousands of rats around, starving for 3 days, with glowing red eyes? The most troublesome thing is that Shunfeng and Luo Qiao are obviously still there. 2 abilities, but I'm not very good at dealing with these kinds of persistent and annoying people. Damn it. Where did these guys come from? Luo Qiao gritted her teeth and cursed. So many of them appearing all at once doesn't seem like a normal phenomenon. Chaos. It's up to you to deal with these guys. We'll help buy you time. Zhang Yi nodded and looked at the space-time continuum. Let us space-type beings handle them. Time and space shrugged. All right, I can seal it temporarily, but ultimately it's up to you to handle it. He looked at Zhang Yi with a curious look in his eyes. There was one thing he didn't quite understand. Everyone else was a space-type ability user, so why was his sealing of these desolate puppets only temporary? Given enough time, those desolate puppets will inevitably adapt to his spatial power and thus try to find a way to break through it. Zhang Yi sealed at least several thousand wild puppets in his alternate dimension, and to this day, there has been no sign of those wild puppets rushing out of his alternate dimension. This puzzled him greatly. Zhang Yi didn't say anything, but only gave a low shout in the team communication channel. All of you, prepare for battle. If you feel you are not up to the task, retreat to my vicinity as soon as possible. Zhang Yi's last words immediately changed the expressions of many people. Especially figures like Morana, King Arthur, and Saladin, once proud kings, had a burning fighting spirit in their eyes. Many years ago, these guys could all compete with Zhang Yi. Even now, their ability index is only over 50,000 points, far behind Zhang Yi's, but they are unwilling to cower in the rear and become a burden to Zhang Yi. Morana slowly raised her left hand, and an endless chill emanated from her body. I absolutely will not allow myself to be looked down upon by. Faced with a raging tide of wild puppets charging towards her, she did not retreat but advanced, choosing to take the initiative to attack. In an instant, the distance between the two closed, and Morana raised his left hand and released the Absolute Zero skill directly towards the area in front of him. Buzz. A field of icy blue energy froze the dozen or so wild puppets in front of them, rendering them unable to move an inch. Absolute Zero is a skill that can approach the lowest temperature in the universe, allowing molecular motion to reach extremely low levels and even producing a state that is close to a pause in field time. Within this area, only Morana himself can move freely. The bodies of those desolate puppets froze completely, watching Morana step by step into the Absolute Zero field. She conjured a giant scythe of death from solidified ice in her hand and slashed it fiercely at a wild golem in front of her. Click. Where the scythe fell, the wild puppet was not cleaved in two, but the moment it was touched, all the microscopic particles that made up its body began to shatter one by one. In an instant, it turned into a tiny, invisible ice shard on the spot. In the end, all that remained was a tiny, rice grain-sized core of flesh and blood, left in the same spot. Morana's eyes flashed. She had seen how Zhang Yi and others dealt with this guy before, so she knew that this flesh and blood core was his body. But if she were to destroy this thing with Absolute Zero, could she do it? With this thought in mind, she immediately turned around, and with a sweep of her scythe, she struck the core of flesh and blood with a clang. However, the core of flesh and blood remained unchanged. On the contrary, because it touched Morana's frost scythe, it seemed to be activated and immediately climbed up. Extending from it, wisps of ferocious, blood-red tentacles quickly covered the entire frost scythe, about to touch Morana's body. Morana's eyes widened in surprise, and he hurriedly shattered the frost scythe in his hand. She dared not touch this messy thing again, and with a series of blows, she shattered 5 more wild puppets. Absolute Zero. Time ends here. Morana's ability to shatter 5 wild golems is a remarkable achievement. Morana quickly retreated, standing side by side with Alexei, the thunder god, beside him. These guys can devour my energy, making it impossible for my field to be maintained for long. As for the rest, Their bodies have probably developed an adaptation to my icy power. Alexei held a thunderous battle axe, watching the desolate puppets whose bodies seemed to be slowly thawing and had not yet regained their movement after being frozen. Then what do we do? With my strength, it will be very difficult to completely kill them. They could see with their own eyes that the flesh and blood cores that had fallen to the ground seemed to have a life of their own, rushing directly towards the still-living, desolate puppets. Then, just as they were submerged in water, they merged into their bodies. Despite fusing with a flesh and blood core once more, the aura emanating from the desolate puppet did not become stronger. However, the bloodthirsty desire in their eyes made it even more terrifying.
Alright, that's it for today's chapter. Tell me in the comments which part you enjoyed the most. If you love manga style stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the Buzz Play Manga. See you in the next chapter with more surprises. Thank you.